Okay, so we are on voluntary manslaughter, and we are talking about um, uh, heat of passion killings. So one more time, heat of passion killing does not mean that you are angry. Sudden quarrel does not mean that it's any time two people get into a fight. Um, you have to be driven to um, kill somebody. You have to, that event has to occur. All right. There's the other way that voluntary manslaughter qualifies. In other words, you go out, you walk away from the murder evaluation, and you ask the question, all right, does this, under these circumstances, does the person qualify for voluntary manslaughter? So the other one is in the actual but unreasonable belief in the necessity to defend oneself or another person against imminent peril to life or great bodily injury. So what that is saying is that, let me go back here. What that means is that um, you are engaged in a sudden quarrel with somebody, or you're engaged in a fight with somebody. It doesn't have to be a sudden fight; it could be planned. But you are, and the key word is unreasonable belief, right? So you're engaged in unlawful behavior, and you are defending yourself by using deadly force under a misbelief or an incorrect belief that you have to defend yourself in that way. So let's say that you and I get into a fist fight. I'm winning the fist fight. Um, and you believe that I'm going to kill you, so you take out a gun and you shoot me. Well, I came into this fight using my fist. You're getting out of it by using a gun. The fact that you think I'm going to kill you simply by punching you in the face or punching your body, that is an unreasonable belief. So let's say that two neighbors are outside one afternoon, both doing yard work, and they get into a quarrel, into an argument over something stupid like, the tree leaves are falling on one of the person's yards, and this is a stupid argument. But it gets very intensified. They're yelling at each other, they're pointing at each other, and there's a third person sitting inside the house and sees their brother in an argument with somebody, and they think, oh my gosh, this person's going to kill my brother because he's got a shovel in his hand. Well, if you listen to the argument, no one's threatened the other person with deadly force. No one's saying, I'm going to kill you with this shovel. He just happens to have a shovel in his hand while they're yelling at each other. So the brother runs out of the house with a gun, shoots the gun, and kills the person that's holding the shovel. So this person has overreacted. They made a mistake. This is an unreasonable belief that they had to defend their family member, and as a result, they killed somebody. That falls under voluntary manslaughter. So if um, if two people are engaged in either argument or in some type of physical confrontation, and one misinterprets that they're going to die, or they have to defend uh, a partner or another person, and that belief is it's not just that it's wrong, but it's an unreasonable belief, right? Just because somebody's holding a shovel in their hand doesn't mean that automatically that the person they're arguing with is threatened because the person has a shovel in their hand. So there's only two ways you go from murder to manslaughter: sudden quarrel, heat of passion. You could sudden quarrel, heat of passion, or an unreasonable belief in the necessity to defend oneself. Okay. Um, so there's one other thing to consider. So let's assume for the moment that there is an event that happens where a reasonable person has been moved to that place where they no longer are thinking rash or they act rashly and without due deliberation, right? So they're at that place where they're not thinking about the consequences. They're so angry. And then time passes. So you have a situation where there's a cooling off period. So let's say that um, someone comes home, I come home, and my wife's in the arms of someone else. So at that point in time, I'm so angry that I probably could kill either her or both of them. But I walk away. I file for divorce. 6 months later, right, during the divorce proceedings, I I just decide now I'm gonna kill my wife. Well, I've had 6 months to reflect and to deliberate, right? I've had 6 months to think about the event. I've had 6 months to cool off. 6 months would be, I think, for most people, enough time to cool off. Cool off to the point where you do have time to deliberate, where you do step back and say, okay, these are the consequences. Now, you may step back and say, after 6 months, I know what the consequences are, and I'm going to kill her because you've had so much time to cool off. Your argument that this should be voluntary manslaughter as opposed to murder is not going to fly because you've had a cooling off period. Now, there is no specific time. There is no law that says you get 3 weeks to cool off, you get 5 days to cool off. Excuse me, every event is very different. So, for example, there was a case years ago in Northern California where a man was charged with molesting a little girl. The case took 2 years to get to trial. This is way before metal detectors at the courthouses. They started the trial. The little girl took the stand. This is 2 years later. The little girl took the stand, was testifying as to what actually happened, and this was the first time her mother heard what he actually did to her daughter. They took a lunch break. Everyone went to lunch. This guy went back to the jail cell. They came back after lunch. The mother walked up to the very first set of seats behind the defendant, pulled out a gun, shot him in the head. She was charged with voluntary manslaughter. She was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. This is a mother, a reasonable person in everyday life. She's a reasonable person. But hearing the events of her daughter, even though the events themselves took place 2 years ago, for the first, she heard the events, what actually happened on that day. So there was no time for her to cool off. She went out, she got a gun, she didn't care about the consequences. She wasn't reflecting on the consequences. This is the perfect example of a heat of passion killing. She walked into the courtroom, pulled the trigger, knowing that someone else was going to have to care for her daughter, knowing that she was going to go to prison. She didn't care. That's a heat of passion. Now, had she heard all of the events 2 years prior, if she actually was able to hear what actually happened 2 years, and she had 2 years to cool off, and then at trial she decides to kill him, then the law would say that she had a cooling off period, and she would not be charged with voluntary manslaughter. She would be charged with murder. All right, so the cooling off period is acting under the direct and immediate influence of the quarrel or heat of passion. So if they're acting under the influence of a sudden quarrel, right, or heat of passion, and the event happens right then we say that there's no time to cool off. But if there's a measured, so you measured by, it's measured by the duration of time it would take the average or ordinary reasonable person to have cooled the passion and for the person's reason to have returned. And so you take it on a case by case basis. You look at everything. You look at the age of the person, the maturity of the person. You look at the event, how severe the event is, how long lasting the event is. So if you have somebody that's been kidnapped and physically abused for 6 months, that's going to take a long time for them to cool off. right? They're going to have nightmares. There's going to be a lot of emotional trauma that's going to go on for a long period of time. So how long is that going to, so a reasonable person may take a long time for them to get to that place where they can um, um, start to reflect and think about their actions. All right, so you have the cooling off period. So it's an objective standard. It's what a reasonable person, right? An ordinary person, not what this person would feel, not what you would feel, but what a reasonable person would feel. Okay. So I have these are just examples of different types of cases where the court found that the person was charged with and convicted of voluntary manslaughter. So I wanted to give you some real life um, examples of voluntary manslaughter. All right, so I'm going to go back while we have time. There's one thing that I want to cover a little bit more thoroughly, and it's actually under murder. So I apologize for um, circling back, but I just, during my break between videos, I thought about this. So, felony murder rule. So, what the felony murder rule says, if you commit this crime and somebody dies, you're held responsible. So, let's say that two people decide to do a robbery and they want the money. They don't really want to hurt anybody. These are pretty decent people, other than the fact that they rob, right? Let's say they're drug addicts, but they don't really want to hurt anybody. They just want the money so they can get drugs. So one of the two gets a plastic gun. It's not even a real gun, but they get a plastic gun that looks real, and they're going to use it to scare the person into opening the register and giving them the money. They've both decided that they're not going to harm this person. They just want the money. And they go out of their way to make sure that they get a plastic gun. They go in the store, they walk up to the clerk, they put a gun to the clerk's head. All the clerk sees is this huge, massive gun. Clerk doesn't realize it's a plastic gun, and the clerk dies from a heart attack. That falls under the felony murder rule. They were engaged in a robbery, and somebody died as a direct cause of the robbery. So it's not about your intent. You can do everything you can possibly think of in order to ensure that nobody gets killed. But if you engage in one of these behaviors, if you engage in robbery, in rape, in arson, in mayhem, torture, carjacking, kidnapping, and somebody dies as a direct result of your criminal activity, you're on the hook for their death. And so I just want to make that real clear. The law doesn't care what your intent is when it comes to the felony murder rule. The only thing the law cares about, let me rephrase that. The only thing the law cares about is you intended to do one of the listed felonies. If you intended to commit arson and somebody dies, you're on the hook. Even if it's a firefighter. Now, I think last year there was a house fire that was set by a woman, and a firefighter fell into the fire and died. So she's charged with murder under the felony murder rule. So I just want to make that really clear. So I know there's a lot of videos, but I had to put these two together in order for them to make sense. I only want 3 outlines. I want one for involuntary manslaughter, one for manslaughter, and one for murder. I'll put this in writing through assignments, but I just want to say it verbally. I only want 3 outlines. You're responsible for looking at all these videos. You're responsible for doing what you need to do in order to pass the test. So I'm assuming you're going to watch the videos to help you understand the subject. So anyway, this is our last video, and I just want to say good luck on the test and good luck in your careers. And I'll be talking to you again before the end of the semester.